Welcome to the Life with RUZHOFF family. Today's topic is very interesting. So, to start it all, my son comes to me and is like, Mom, would you actually consider doing a video about teenage pregnancies? And my first thought was, you're a boy. I didn't say, but I thought it. I was like, you're a boy. What's with teenage pregnancies? And he's like, yeah, my friends and I were chatting the other day, and we were like, no, actually, my friend said, the kind of videos your mom does are very nice, very educative. Would you consider asking her to do a video about teenage pregnancies? And the friend in question has a sister, like a pre-teen sister, like all these kids are pre-teens and teens. So I guess those are kind of things that I get to talk about. And considering that this friend of my son's has a sister, probably that is something that interests him. So I was like, oh, is he asking because of his sisters? Like, no, mom, we all generally interested. I mean, even at school, those are things that everyone talks about, but it's not something where we all have direct information, or most parents or some parents don't get to talk about such stuff. So it would be really great if you did a video about that. So once again, Life with RUZHOFF, or you can say RUZHOFFS with an S at the end. Welcome to the family. I go by the name of RUZHOFF on all social media channels. Of course, I want to thank you so much for the journey so far and for the support. So this topic is not just about parents or the teenagers or the pre-teenagers. I think it's important for all of us as a community. I mean, we're uncles, we're sisters, we're aunties, and these are things that we all maybe have thought about at some time in our life. We're all one-time teenagers, or we have people that we support in our life that we could bring by this information. So the question my son stated was, let's talk about teenage pregnancies. For me, I think it's very important to know that most teenage pregnancies, from my experience personally and work-wise or professionally, happens mostly in marginalized communities, in communities that are not financially stable. But that doesn't mean it's really only for such communities. It happens everywhere, but mostly in such marginalized communities where girls and teenagers, and it's very important for me to state teenagers, not just girls, because it's a double situation. When a girl gets pregnant, she's impregnated by a man or a boy. So it's very important to state that it's important for both genders to get information about this. So in societies where the teenagers or the children, girls and boys who are heading into this stage, don't have information and rights, or rights about their reproductive health and well-being, it's most likely they'll end up with teenage pregnancies. Of course, thinking of that, maybe it's also nice to reflect and ask yourself, how was it in my days? Did I have knowledge about this during my teenage days? What was my relationship to my sexuality, to my reproductive system in that time, between the ages of 12 and maybe 21, 22? Because the teenage state it varies from person to person. So personally, I believe the causes, like I said here, I'm talking as a mom and as a social worker and someone who was once a teenager. One of the main causes is lack of information about sexual and reproductive health. And when I talk about that, I must say that is affected a lot by cultural beliefs, by religious beliefs. Using my own example, I grew up in the African setting. And unfortunately, I'm not saying all, but in the setting where I grew up, it wasn't normal to talk about such stuff. And if parents did talk about such stuff, it was always in a very negative way. I remember, for example, from the age of 12 and all through my teenagehood, even to university, I strongly believed if I ever became pregnant out of wedlock, I would die. My parents would kill me or they would disown me. Looking back now, that's pretty sad, yeah? but that's how we were brought out to believe, you know, like creating this fear. You can't become pregnant out of wedlock, you can't engage into sexual activities. But what our parents didn't consider is some of these things are just natural. When the hormones kick in, I mean, we all had our crushes, we all had boys that we were attracted to. I would say on my side, it helped. The fear helped a lot because I grew up in a very strict family. My dad was very, very strict. So this fear of, if anything happened, I would be dead, you know, or I would be disowned. I wouldn't be able to go to school. And since these things were so important to me, like going to school, having an education, having a career, the fear helped, but not in a healthy way. And then when we think of religious settings, people are told you have to abstain. That's very amazing. I'll talk about it, but how realistic is that? We never got direct information from our parents of how we can, you know, navigate all these feelings that you get as a teenager all at once, overwhelming, very exciting. You're discovering things about you. Like a female, I remember I developed boobs, I think at 13 or 14. I was a late bloomer. You know, when you get your menstruals and things start changing. I remember I was very skinny, like skinny, like, you know, like a stick almost all through my life. But even with my skinniness, I could see my body change, you know. And it's kind of exciting. And when you notice that you're attractive to the opposite gender, it's very important to have that knowledge, to have knowledge about your sexual and reproductive health. So one of the causes is that if you don't have information about that and how to deal with your sexuality and what that means for you. Not forgetting inadequate services for teenagers. I'll again use my example, just you know, as a, in German we say Stichpunkt, but of course we know that is wide-based, especially in poor or marginalized economies. We don't have children and teenage services where kids, for example, can call and anonymously talk about things they wouldn't want to talk about with their parents, or services where the parents can go with the kids to talk about the different changes their children are experiencing, you know, when they turn into teenagers. It's a whole new journey. It's, every one of us has been a teenager and we all know it's crazy. The hormones, your body system, your thinking, your mental judgment, everything changes. And then when there are no systems in place to help teenagers, including their parents, because being a mom, I know that as a parent, these things can be very overwhelming when you wake up in the morning and your kids are different. I'll give you an example. I'm not sure if my son is okay with it, but I'll ask him after doing this video. If he's not happy about it, I'll remove it. Recently, I posted a very sweet, in my view, very sweet picture of my son on Instagram. And I don't know if you know this, but my journey on social media has always been, I never ever posted my kids until they were old enough to give me the consent. So at some point, I asked them if they were okay with it, because they were like really getting on my nerves. We like to join Instagram and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no way. But I can start slowly by maybe posting you once in a while, like on Mother's Day and everything. And they were okay with it. So recently it's like, I don't like that. I understood that. Of course, I was like, come on, you know. But I didn't get into a discussion because I knew probably as a teenager, it's very embarrassing for him to post his baby pictures. So you won't be seeing any baby pictures of one of my sons. The other one is okay with it and the other one is not. That again shows how different children are. Not forgetting, like I said, family, community, and social pressures can also be a cause of teenage pregnancies. We all know, unfortunately, about child marriages, which exist in many societies, and again mostly in religious societies. I don't want to name like the different, you know, societies, but we know them. And then like in the African society, especially the illiterate community, the poor community, not even just in Africa, but the very illiterate community, they tend to marry off the girl child very early in teenagehood and even marry them to older men. So of course that leads to teenage pregnancies, which is very unfortunate. Or looking back at the Corona time, many kids, I was talking to many people, like the friends I have in Uganda, and they were like, oh my God, we're keeping our fingers crossed and we're all stressed because like all the kids in the neighborhood are now pregnant, because schools in Uganda, for example, are closed for about 3 years. And we talk about not just that, but parents lost their jobs. There's no social service help that that could help the parents financially. So it was a very dire state, and the kids ended up getting pregnant. And how does that happen when the kids don't have their needs met by their parents? Their clothing, we're talking about girls who need sanitary towels, we're talking about girls who are in the teenage stage, maybe they need makeup, they need nice clothes. They'll end up being lured into, I'll say, illicit sexual activities because someone is promising to give them money. So unfortunately it goes or falls back also to marginalized societies, financial instability, and illiteracy, unfortunately. Not forgetting, again, it all intertwines with each other, the ignorance. I think this is really hard to say. I think I shouldn't even say that some parents are ignorant, but unfortunately, yeah. I hope you understand, because I know if you're not so good with the English language, you might confuse that with stupid. Ignorance doesn't mean someone is stupid. Ignorance means someone lacks the information. So some parents are ignorant. They lack the information of how to deal with a teenager, how to deal with such situations. So of course their children, the teenagers, end up, in not so nice situations where they end up getting pregnant. And speaking of that, as a social worker, it's important to note that actually most of the, I would say, illicit sexual activities or abusive sexual activities, because most teenage pregnancies are a result of unwanted sexual activity, or they're just unwanted pregnancies, like they were just experimenting, or maybe they were raped. And most of these rapes actually take place in the family setting. It's either a cousin, a relative, even parents, unfortunately. So if the parents are ignorant about that, and the socioeconomic state is not good, then there's a big danger that a teenager will end up getting pregnant. Now, since the children who asked me are German, allow me to also switch to our system. Hier in Deutschland haben wir ein sehr gutes System. Hier in Deutschland haben wir sagen wir so, sehr gute Services, wo man sie wenden kann. In diesem Fall, wenn man Teenagerkinder hat. Wir haben Jugendamt. Ich meine, da kann man sie an Jugendamt anwenden und alle Fragen stellen und definitiv Antworten dazu bekommen. Dann haben wir eine Wohltätigkeitsorganisation wie Caritas, wir haben Diakonie, wir haben Hotlines, wo Teenager selber anrufen können und anonym Sachen und Fragen stellen. Wir haben Kinderärzte, Teenagers dürfen alleine zum Arzt gehen und die können solche Sachen auch ansprechen, ohne dabei sein den Eltern. Ne? Dann fühlt sich man sicher. Und für alle Kinder, die hier in Deutschland sind, würde ich mal sagen, traut euch, sprecht mit eurem Kinderarzt über solche Sachen, sprecht über Verhütung und so weiter, was ich nachher erwähnen würde. Sprecht mit euren Eltern darüber. Also ich finde, auch komisch wie es klingt, wenn man Teenager ist, glaubt man manchmal, die Eltern sind einem peinlich, aber die Eltern wollen immer das Beste, und es ist immer ratsam und besser, solche Sachen mit den Eltern zu besprechen. Aber klar, es gibt auch Familien, wo es einfach nicht geht, ne? Wo es keine guten Eltern vorhanden sind. Dann würde ich sagen, wenden Sie sich an alle Kinder und Jugendliche Einrichtungen, das wir haben hier in Deutschland, mit Jugendamt an erster Stelle, und dann haben Sie immer eine Antwort. So, we all talk about teenage pregnancy. When you hear teenage pregnancy, I think the first thing for me, what comes to my mind is, I don't want to even imagine it. If I'd become pregnant at 14, 15, even 12, which is very common, how would have that affected me? What would have happened with my life? How would have I turned out? The questions are many, and I have examples out of my school life. When I was in senior 4, that is high school, I had, I think, 2 or 3 girls in my class who got pregnant, and I'm going to use those girls to give you an example of how that actually teenage pregnancies can affect, or the effects of teenage pregnancies. But I'll start with like the topmost one is maternity and child mortality. We're talking about 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds whose bodies are just beginning to develop, who probably don't even know they're pregnant, so they don't even get antenatal care. We're talking about teenagers that are coming from marginalized families, that are coming from socio-economically weak families. We're talking about children that are coming from very strict families in terms of religion and culture, that they probably end up not getting any help whatsoever, and they probably most of the time die while giving birth or even before then. So definitely that's the very saddest bit, the child and mortality rate. Not forgetting, like I said, most teenage pregnancies, 99% are unwanted pregnancies. Like I said, when you're a teenager, when you decide to engage in sexual activity, it's all about experimentation. It's all about the hormones. Like everything is overwhelming, everything is exciting in that moment. You're not thinking about being a mom, raising a child, or being a dad. We don't want to forget the boys in this picture, because we sometimes have teenagers, you know, how do I call it, becoming parents, like the teenage boy making a teenage girl pregnant. So for me, it's very important for you to keep in mind, we're talking about both sexes, we're talking about both genders. Yes, the girl will carry the baby, but this affects both. In the case where, for example, the baby daddy or the dad of the child is also a teenager, but most of the time it's also adults that end up abusing, you know, the hormones in this situation with the teenagers. So it's a double-edged sword. So definitely, because it's always unwanted pregnancies, it means most of the teenagers would prefer to abort. Unfortunately, like I said, if parents and the teenagers themselves lack the information, they will not be able to get safe abortion services. They'll probably try out other things. Like when we were growing up, we used to hear stories of like people taking crazy stuff. I don't want to really say the stuff because very many people watch my channel, and even teenagers themselves. So I don't want to say something that will probably, let me say, initiate an unsafe abortion. So like they'll try out different things that were completely like crazy, you know, and not safe. And of course, some of them died or they got damaged, but they were desperate to have abortions. So that's definitely one of the effects. It might work out that the abortion works out well, but most of them end up getting infections because everything doesn't get cleared out properly, or they might even end up never being able to have children because they damage the system inside. So that's very, very sad, and that's definitely one of the effects of teenage pregnancies. Not forgetting the trauma, the stigma and rejection, sometimes even violence from family, from society, from friends, and even the schools, which is very unfortunate, because I believe schools should be a support system for these kids. So most teenagers who end up getting pregnant, they will get rejected by their peers, they will be ridiculed, they'll be traumatized in society, but it's going to be like, we call it speaking behind hands, saying, oh my God, she's pregnant, and the parents are going to be embarrassed. And in very strict communities, like in my case where I thought my dad would kill me, the children might get rejected or even get abused, beaten and everything. So that's a really, really sad situation. Not forgetting the socioeconomic problems become even worse. I mean, if I'm a poor mom, like in my case, I'm a single mom, if I'm not financially stable and my daughter ends up becoming pregnant at the age of 12, that's a big problem. That would be a big problem, because that would mean I will have to take care not just financially of my daughter, but also of the child, my grandchild. That is like double pressure. So it worsens even the socioeconomic situation, which puts like a strain on the entire family and maybe drives the parents also insane on the other side, which might also again lead to violence in the family. Like I said, we have a culture, not everywhere, but it's very common and very widespread, of child marriages. That's what I call them. Because if a 12-year-old is getting married, for me, that's a child. They're not yet of age, so I prefer to call that child marriages. Automatically programmed is abuse in the Beziehung. Beziehung means relationship in German. Because most of the time it's older men. These children have no experience about anything as regards that, motherhood, being wives, and 94% of them end up in very abusive marriages and relationships, and their world just ends. I mean, because there's no one there to save them. This is someone who automatically controls their whole life. So teenage pregnancies can really have very, 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 very dire effects in the outcome of a child's life until they leave this world. Being a social worker and a mom, I don't want to talk about just the problems and the effects. I always, whatever I say here, if we tackle a problem, I like and love to speak about the solutions. Before I dive into the solutions, I'll kindly invite you and request you to let us have a discussion in the comment section, because we are a community. We are a community that is interested into social empowerment, a community that is interested in leaving a mark on this world, changing things, and like I said, change starts with you and me. So I would like you to interact with me in the comment section. Let me know what you think about teenage marriages, like the causes and effects. Probably I didn't name everything, but that's why such discussions are very, very important. And speaking of solutions, let me know in the comment section what you think would be of help, or in your situation, maybe experience something like that. Or like I was saying, I use myself an example in most cases. Growing up, what would I have wished for? You know, I for example, did have wished for my parents to scare me and be like, oh my God, if you become pregnant, you're dead. Nada, you know, you don't exist anymore. I would have preferred something more educative, like how do you go about it? Does it mean the world ends? You know, so I lived in fear. And I think such things affect you for the rest of your life, you know? So those are things that I would like you to discuss with me, your personal experiences or your thoughts about all this that we're talking about. So we're diving into the solutions, help, how we as a society, as a community, parents, government, community, peers, and of course, not forgetting the siblings can help. Because teenage pregnancies, like I said, they change the entire family dynamic. So we're talking about if we two kids and I become pregnant, my sibling gets affected. Like in the family where I come from, I'm sure if any of my sisters had become pregnant, it would have massively, massively affected me. And not just me, but also my parents and my mom probably, because unfortunately, in the African culture, the woman is always responsible for whatever goes wrong for the kids. So in my mind, I always had it, actually, I can't do that to my mom. I can't mess up, which is a pity because my mom is not responsible for my mistakes. She did her best, but whatever things I do or I mess up in life, it's because I'm human and my mom has nothing to do with it. But unfortunately, some of our societies, some of our cultures function that way. So like I said, it's important to consider like the whole picture, you know, not just the person that is affected, that is having the teenage pregnancy. Number one, of course, sexual and reproductive education and awareness. And we're talking about in schools, at home, in the community, okay? Luckily enough, I would say in Uganda, they have that system. It's not so widespread, or that people don't use the service because of our cultural restraints and religious beliefs, because everyone's like, wants to talk about sex or wants to talk about sexual reproductive health. But I personally, I remember when I was doing my internship at university, I worked with two organizations, and one of them was something like what we'd call the Children's Services here, and the other one was called AFREP. It was, I think, a Danish organization, and they were offering such services. And I remember us going to outreaches, going to slums, different areas, you know, like to teach and bring these kids by about their sexual and reproductive health. But I noticed that most parents and most people, the society, the community was not open to that, because they're like, oh my God, who is talking about that? Because unfortunately, in such communities, most of the time, everyone looks at their reproductive system or sexual system as something like taboo, evil. You don't talk about it, you do it in the dark, make kids, and that's it, unplanned kids, you know, which is a pity, which is unfortunate. So that's very important. When I come to parents, we're talking protection. Personally, I started talking to my kids about this when they were like 8 years. And then a time came when they got to start learning about such things in school, and then they would come with questions, even some questions that they thought, they were like, oh, that's so disgusting, they told us this and this in school. And then I would, you know, try and explain it to them, you know, judging by their age and how far they are, you know, in their blooming. But from the age of 8, my children know certain things, and we still, it's a, you know, an ongoing journey. It's a journey that never stops. So for every age they get into, you have to keep talking to them. So I talk openly to my children about that, about protection, be it abstinence, be it contraceptives, be it, we're talking about contraceptive pills, condoms, everything. Talk to your kids about that. Talk to them about the outcomes of unprotected sex. Talk to them about, for example, I'm a mom of boys, I have sons. They won't become pregnant, but they could make someone pregnant. So it's important to tell them that actually the sexual and reproductive system is a good thing. I think sex shouldn't be a taboo or trauma. It's actually a beautiful thing when you come think about it. And that's how I portray it to my kids. But I also tell them it can also have negative outcomes if you engage in it without thought. So that way my kids, my boys, also carry the responsibility of protecting whichever girl they will date at some point. Because I feel contraception shouldn't be just a burden and a responsibility for the female or for us the women, but also the men. It's important to raise our children, especially the boy moms, raise our children knowing that it is okay and it's actually desired, and they should also take responsibility in protecting the women they love. So that's why I talk about such things with my kids, and tell them, should they fall in love one time, get girlfriends, and want to engage in, sexual activities, I'm fine with that. I'll go buy them that protection and everything they need, but please protect yourselves and the other girl, because it's not just about pregnancies. You can also get diseases, and that's why it's good to talk about such things. Not forgetting, families and parents should also talk to, like I said, to both genders, not just girls. Like in our family, it was always us. I don't remember my mom telling my brothers, if you made someone pregnant, you'd be killed, you'd be disowned. It never happened. The pressure was on us, and it's not fair, because if I'd become pregnant, it would have probably been someone in my age bracket. So imagine if all parents just put the pressure on the girls, and the men are free to wild around and enjoy, everything that their reproductive system has to offer. It's not fair and it's not right. So it's very important when you're doing this education for both genders. In my case, I have boys, but I still educate them about all these things, because I want them to grow up into responsible human beings that also know it's important to protect someone they love, and the relationship is a partnership. So it takes two, and not just a girl. Not forgetting, in government and schools, it's very, 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 very important to do this kind of education, to do this kind of sensitization, to do this kind of awareness. In first world countries, or I'll say in Europe, we have all these services, like I said, that offer, this kind of knowledge and education to the kids, but still not all kids get that information, because the parents must be open to it. So again, it falls back to the parents. It's us, the parents, to be more vigilant, more proactive, and make sure that we educate our kids. A support system is very, very important to enable the girls to complete school, because often at times when a girl becomes pregnant, even here in Europe, the parents will not even bother to help them go on with school. Or like when I was in high school, I told you about the 3, I think, girls who got pregnant. These girls had to do everything in their power to get an abortion, death or life, because otherwise they wouldn't have been allowed to do the exams. I remember one of them actually didn't manage to get an abortion, or she didn't want. No, I think the school staff found out before she could get an abortion. I remember her name very, very well. And they stopped her from doing exams. She was suspended from school. I'll never forget that. And she was one of the smartest girls in our class. Lucky enough, I followed up her story. Her parents, I think, were really amazing. She got her child and still managed to go back to school. Kudos to them, which is very amazing. That's how it should be. But we know many times, especially in the African setting or in poor communities, you definitely drop out of school and no one will support you. You're already an embarrassment to the whole family and community. So I would encourage parents, getting pregnant. Teenage pregnancies don't mean the end of the world. Teenage pregnancies don't mean your child is a loser. Teenage pregnancies don't mean your child's dreams die there, and they know they have a life and a right to it, and they're just human. It could have happened to you or to anyone else. So please create a support system for the children. Like I said, such situations are a strain on parents. I'm a mom myself, so I know. And I would encourage you to seek counseling for the whole family if there are siblings involved, because sometimes it can be embarrassing for the other siblings, or they even don't know how to deal with their sister who is pregnant. They don't know how to deal with her. So it's important to get counseling, and those services, especially here in Europe, are free of charge. If they're not there, you can still get to pay for those services if you're in position. Avail teenagers with guidance of a doctor about contraceptives and, like all kinds of contraceptives that exist. Talking about sex reproductive health shouldn't be a taboo. Girls that get rejected by the family should be able to be re-assimilated into the community, into the system, by putting into place adoption homes and centers. In Europe, again, we have those systems. In Uganda, for example, I'll say Uganda particularly because that's where I grew up, we don't really have that widespread. There are some charity organizations that do that, but it's not available everywhere. So I would encourage the government to do something about that. Teenagers who end up getting pregnant should have access and rights. I repeat, teenagers who get pregnant should have access and rights to terminate the pregnancy, should that be their wish. With emphasis on should that be their wish. I mean, it's very possible that someone gets pregnant at 16 and she's like, I want to keep my baby. Then she should have a right to keep it and get the support system in place. But if a teenager gets raped, sexually abused, and they end up getting pregnant or just unwanted pregnancy, and they decide, I don't want to keep that baby, they should have a right, and there should be systems in place to make that possible. And that goes back to letting people, kids, teenagers, and everyone be able to decide about their bodies and their reproductive health. For the family, siblings, and peers, and now that goes addressing my son who asked that and his friends, I would say be supportive, be kind, be understanding. It's not the end of the world. Counseling, parents, go for counseling, take your kids for counseling. It's not something embarrassing, it's something very beneficial, and it could be of great help for the whole family, because we've also had instances of teenagers who have committed suicide, because of unwanted pregnancies. So counseling for the whole family is something I would really, really advise. Parents, try to explain the situation as good as you can to the whole family, to the siblings, and let them know it happened, but it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. Try to get knowledge about government, financial and support systems that are in place. Do some research, ask friends, ask family, ask the school, ask, government officers, but try to get an information, because there are always systems in place that can support you. Like I said, here in Europe, we have a Jugendamt. If you should get a child, we have Jugendamt, we have Arbeitsagentur. If your teenager should get pregnant, then there are very many services in place that can also support the family financially. Buy baby clothes, like plan for the entire time, because you need health insurance for the baby, everything. So just, make sure you get these services, because they are there for you to be used and they're free of charge. And a very important option, if the teenager is not interested in an abortion but still wants to keep the baby, there's also always a possibility of giving up that child for adoption, but only and only and only with 100% consent of the mother. If the mother is 100% sure, I want to give up my baby, then you go through the whole steps, with the counseling and everything, and then that is also always an option, to help both parties. So for my kids and your friends, I'll say it in English, then I'll say it again in Germany. Always use protection, even when a girl says she's on contraceptives, because sometimes contraceptives don't work unless you are ready to start a family. But for as long as you're not ready to start a family, always use contraception. And again, it's not just about getting pregnant. You could also get terrible diseases. Pregnancy prevention is also your responsibility, and I'm saying this because I'm a boy mom, and the other kids that I asked the friends are all boys except for this one girl who is the sister. So protection to avoid teenage pregnancies is not just the girl's responsibility, it's also the boy's responsibility. If you make someone pregnant, talk about sensitively. You can always come to me, talk to me about it. Am I going to be excited and exhilarated about it? No. Am I going to be shocked? Yes. Am I going to be supportive? Yes, 100%. Are we going to talk about it and find solutions about it? 100%. So don't be afraid to come to me to talk about it. And for the friends, yourselves, feel free to talk to your parents. No matter how they react, parents will at the end want the best for you. They might be shocked for a minute, they might be overwhelmed for a minute, but who can help you better than your parent? Of course, as a social worker, I would again say, unfortunately, not all parents are those kind of parents. So if you unfortunately have those kind of parents that will probably, you know, go wild, you know, violate your rights and everything, then I would suggest talk to your family doctor about it, or call these hotlines that we have here in Germany, or talk to Jugendamt, and you will get support. And for me, I would say for the girl in the group, because this is a group of boys, and I know there's one girl who is the sister to this boy who actually told my son, oh, why don't you ask your mom to talk about this? I would say, if you do ever get pregnant in your teenage years unwanted, it's also not the end of the world. You can still go to school, complete your studies, you know, follow your dreams, fulfill all your dreams. It's not the end of the world. And actually, if a child is a result of love, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, that's how you came into the world, as a result of love. So should that pregnancy be a result of love, it's a beautiful thing, and it's not something that should throw you off board. Once again, use protection, talk to your parents about it. If it happens, it's not the end of the world. I'll say this again in German. Now I'll try to, because my head is now thinking only in English. So, mein Lieben, mein Jungs, ihr sollt euch immer schützen, falls ihr irgendwann Freundinnen habt. Ich weiß, ihr habt keine Freundinnen im Moment, aber falls die Zeit kommt, immer euch schützen, nicht nur gegen Schwangerschaften, sondern auch gegen geschlechtliche Krankheiten, die auch nicht schon sind. Und ich finde, wenn man verliebt ist oder wenn du jemanden liebst, dann hast du auch diese Auftrag, musst du sie auch beschützen. Und da, in dem Moment, wo du, sag ich mal so, verhütet, beschützt du auch dein Liebster. Und dann verhinderst du ungewollte Schwangerschaften. Und von daher ist es nicht nur die Aufgabe von Mädchen aufzupassen, sondern es ist auch eure Aufgabe, okay? Aber falls das passieren sollte, dass ihr ein Mädchen schwängert, wäre ich glücklich darüber? Im ersten Moment nicht. Würde ich sagen, oh toll? Nein, absolut nicht. Wäre ich schockiert? 100%. Aber am Ende des Tages würde ich euch supporten? 100%. Das wisst ihr, wir halten zusammen. Ich meine, das hätte mir auch in meinen jungen Jahren passieren können. Und wie ich gesagt habe, das ist nicht der Ende der Welt. Ne? Es gibt immer Lösungen. Klar, es ist hart, es ist unschön, vor allem für die Eltern, weil es ist eine sehr komplizierte Situation. In dem Moment noch ein weiteres Kind, sage ich mal, so groß zu sehen. Und da müssen wir darüber sprechen, darüber beraten, vielleicht noch in Therapie gehen und schauen, wie wir das hinkriegen. Aber am Ende des Tages würden wir das gemeinsam schaffen. Und in diesem Sinne möchte ich mich nochmal bei euch bedanken. Vielen lieben Dank, und ich bin sehr stolz auf euch, dass ihr euch getraut habt, mir so eine Frage zu stellen, und ein bisschen muss ich schmunzeln und auch mich auf die Schulter klopfen und sagen, das gibt mir auch wieder ein Gefühl, dass ich eine gute Mutter bin, wenn ihr euch traut, mir solche Sachen zu fragen, oder beziehungsweise, dass eure Freunde auch sie trauen, mir diesen Auftrag zu geben, euch aufzuklären. So my loves, once again, like I was saying, I want to thank my boys and their friends for being confident enough and trusting enough to ask me to talk about this very important topic to them and many teenagers and kids around the world. And I have to tap myself on the shoulder because now that I've talked about this as a mom, it makes me realize that I'm probably a good mom. If my boys can trust me and ask me about something like that, or even their friends who requested that I talk about this video, trusting enough to have me talk about this, it makes me proud and happy, and also realize that I'm doing something right with this channel, that I'm doing something right with this social empowerment journey. And I hope we can all spread this message, we can all spread this video, we can all learn from it, but most of all, I would like to start a conversation with you in the comment section. What was your experience as a teenager? What was your experience growing up? What is your experience with other kids, or with your kids, or your nieces and nephews, you know, or the people in your community, or the people you work with? And then I'll also, of course, through that discussion, I'll also go on and tell you more about my life growing up, as a teenager and how that all affected me, you know, as regards the sexual and reproductive health. Once again, thank you so much for watching this far. If you're a new member here, kindly subscribe. If you're a recurring member, I appreciate you so much. Don't get tired of sharing the videos. Comment, like I said, I love discussions. Like the videos. Turn on your notification button so you never miss a video. And let me know, just like these kids, in the comment section, what kind of videos you'd like to see from me in the future. Until next time, I love you. Bye.